I don't know how many of our attendees here today got to see their wonderful presentation at STEMmy Fest back in the fall, but they're going to teach us a little more about STEAM and how to do it the child's way. Welcome, Michelle and Saki. Thank you for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. So hello, everyone. We're excited to be back presenting. So first, I would like to share the video that we shared back in September. Was that September? The STEAM Fest? The video is about how we sort of think of the STEAM learning and play at Boston Children's Museum, how we approach the learning for children, especially children with special needs. So first, I will play that video. If you've seen it before, you can see it again. If this is your first time, and enjoy the video.
Hi, my name is Saki, and I'm the Health and Wellness Educator at Boston Children's Museum.
My name is Michelle. I am the STEAM Program Manager at Boston Children's Museum.
Boston Children's Museum has been part of the Boston community since 1913, which makes us the second oldest children's museum in the world. The museum welcomes about 560,000 visitors each year. However, of course, this year will be very different because of the pandemic. Our programs and exhibits are generally designed to meet the development and learning needs of children from birth to 10 years old.
Saki and I are hoping to share with you some of the key ideas and approaches behind the ways we develop and frame STEAM activities. We will also talk about the role adults can play in supporting children in their learning at the museum.
As an informal learning environment, the museum offers unique experiences for children and families where they can follow their own interests and explore at their own pace. Many of our exhibits and programs focus on the process of learning instead of the end results. And we prioritize exploration and play as two essential processes for learning. In the museum's approach, learning is defined as an active, multisensory process that is directed by the learners, the children. The museum educators are here to support the learning process for each child and encourage many different ways children can learn in their own ways. Based on this approach, a lot of our programs, especially ones that are aimed for children under 5, are open-ended and support a child's choice and agency. For example, we may give children a bunch of yarn to play with, and we may see a child weaving. Some children may want to feel the texture of various types of yarn in their hands, while others may try to tangle up the yarn to make a spider web. All of these ways to engage and explore are valid and important, and children can develop many of their foundational skills that will promote their future school and life readiness. I've been referring to our visitors as children, but about 50% of our visitors are actually adults who come with those children, and we consider those adult visitors as learners too. In many learning environments, children are often judged and evaluated for their successes and failures based on predetermined criteria and structures that are set by adults. However, in the museum, we put children at the center of the learning experience, and adults can engage with their children to learn what they're interested in and capable of doing. Going back to the example about the yarn, adults often set up their minds that there is a correct way of doing things. They may think neatly weaving the yarn is the right thing to do, and if their children start to do something else, they might feel that their children are doing something wrong. Or they might have some specific learning agenda in mind, such as learning the colors of the yarn. But the child may be more interested in rolling a ball of yarn on the floor and not respond to the questions about the colors. That could be frustrating and feel like a failure for the adult. However, if we actually pay attention to what the child is doing, the child might be fascinated by how the yarn ball unravels as they roll it, which is in fact a very exciting learning moment. This especially speaks true to many children with special needs, who may find it challenging to fit within a scripted norm. But if we can actually let them follow their passion and find their own interests, their world can widen and they can find their own way of learning for their future success.
At Boston Children's Museum, we facilitate STEAM programming in many ways. We have a STEAM lab where we host a variety of programs for visitors. Additionally, we facilitate STEAM programming throughout other parts of the museum, including various exhibits that have a STEAM focus and some pop-up programs that happen in different spots around the museum. For example, STEAM Sprouts is a drop-in program, meaning visitors are welcome to stop by for any amount of time, that runs for 1 hour a week, engaging children 3 and under in STEAM. Activities in this program include exploring magnets and wind exploration through testing out various materials in front of a fan. Messy Monday is another weekly drop-in program which is open to all of our visitors, with special attention paid to ensure even our very young visitors can engage in the activity using various senses. During a Messy Monday activity, visitors might be encouraged to explore natural materials, such as mud and water, or they may paint with different textured objects. These activities provide opportunities to explore, play, and yes, get a little messy. In all of these spaces and programs, as Saki said, our focus is more on the process of learning than a specific end result. It is common for adults to ask how a certain activity we are doing qualifies as STEAM, and they want their child to get the right answer or do the right thing. That is, to do the thing they are presented with. However, particularly because we work with very young learners and their caregivers, we use a different lens in our programs. In any of the STEAM programming we do in the museum, our major goals for the programming are the development of STEAM habits of mind and skills. STEAM habits of mind, as we define them, are ways of thinking that are reflected in behavior. We have identified 5 major habits of mind, which are curiosity, critical thinking, creativity, persistence, and problem solving. Additionally, we focus on 9 STEAM skills or abilities. These are analytical reasoning, investigating, making connections, experimenting, communicating, collaboration, developing craft, envisioning, and perspective taking. While this might feel like a lot, this is what we consider as we design our STEAM programs. The habits of mind and skills are intertwined like a web. They support each other and are further strengthened and developed as a whole. Certain programs focus on specific habits of mind and skills, but there may be others that you see as well. These habits of mind and skills will support young learners as they explore, learn, and continue with STEAM initiatives in the future. Let's think back to the yarn example Saki mentioned. In this scenario, a child comes to a collaborative drop-in program where they are presented with a lot of yarn attached to the windows and walls that made a big spider web. They can add to or interact with the yarn spider web in any way they would like. Which STEAM habits of mind and skills do you think are being practiced in this activity in any way that a child might interact with the yarn? Please take a moment to reflect on which habits of mind and skills you think are focused on in an activity where visitors are exploring with yarn. Okay, what did you come up with? We feel that persistence is a key habit of mind, especially if a child decides to weave a long piece of yarn through the web. Investigating is a key skill in this activity. Maybe they realize that one type of yarn is thicker than another. Maybe they find that they can tie the yarn into knots, or maybe one is easier to hold or weave with. Also, collaboration. They'll be adding to the yarn spider web with their family group and even with other visitors. While they explore, the adult might also be exploring beside them, and they can show each other what they're working on. And you might see others that come into play as well. As another example, when exploring magnets, children are given a variety of materials and magnets. And those materials are both magnetic and non-magnetic, which promotes curiosity and experimentation. And in another program we do frequently called Balls and Tubes, children are given a variety of balls, tubes, and boards to explore. In this, they're developing persistence and problem-solving skills through their investigations. Visitors are given a general, open-ended context in these programs. Ultimately, the child goes in a certain direction, and we go with them, even if it's not what we originally planned for or expected. We model and encourage adults to engage with their child wherever they are in their explorations, asking their child to make predictions, describe what they notice, and imagine different possibilities and solutions. We can trust the child to find their own skills and define their own goals. Particularly in the case of working with children with special needs, we, as adults, often focus too much on what they cannot do. However, they can actually do a lot of things in their own ways and often surprise us with how they find ways to interact and play, which is an asset for both the child and the adult to embrace. Part of our role as educators in the museum is to support adults in helping to release any ideas they have about the way an activity or experience should be, and instead affirm for them that any way the activity or experience goes is great and helps us all better understand and celebrate the capabilities of a child.
Thank you so much for taking the time to learn about STEAM and young learners at Boston Children's Museum. We hope hearing about some of our approach. Hi, my name is Saji. And
Sorry, it's like the recording of a recording. So some of the sort of like the visuals and audio got a little out of sync, but it's okay. So now I want to spend some time talking about how we apply that thinking that we just shared to actual practice. And honestly, a lot of this is applicable to both children with or without special needs. So we might not always say like for kids with special needs necessarily, but whatever we say actually apply to that population as well. But this is something that we do regardless of who we are serving. So as we sort of mentioned, it is important when we are designing a program and working with our visitors, our children and adults, to find the strength of the person, of the child. So we apply this strength-based approach, which is basically to say that we can work with what the child has, like what the child is capable of doing, what the child brings with themselves, not what's missing from the child. So it's easy to say my child is blind, so like they cannot do X, Y, Z. Well, that may or may not be true, but we work with what the child brings with them. And then when we are thinking about the child, we want to think of sort of like how what might be considered weakness can actually be a strength. So for example, if someone says like, wow, like this child like talks a lot, oh my God. We could actually look at it a little bit differently and then think about the child as being communicative and being articulate. Or someone is like, wow, this child is like really fearful, really shy. I don't know how to engage with this child. Well, again, like if we look at it from a different perspective, you can say that the child is careful and thoughtful. Or if someone is like, wow, like this child is like needing attention a lot, Well, again, like instead of like seeing that as a bad thing, we can think that this child really knows what they need and being very emotionally aware. And by saying all this, I don't mean to say that we want to ignore the problems or concerns or sort of like areas of improvement of the child. This is not what we mean. We still need to address the concerns, behaviors, all sorts of things. But again, like it is more about looking at some of the weaknesses or something that can easily be considered as weaknesses as strengths. And really try to think the best of the child and try to like bring out the strengths so that we can also use the strengths to address maybe the problems or concerns or whatever the child might need to also work on. And to do that, what I often say is that first we have to observe the child before we jump on doing anything. We need to observe the child so that we can learn the child's interests or strengths. To do that, it is important that we sit with them or that we are at their physical level because they're all smaller and be their eye level and try to like look at the thing from their perspective, not our perspective. Like one time, like we did just like a fun experiment where we sort of like attached a camera on a little like shopping cart that was like about the size of a 3-year-old and then like run around the museum with a shopping cart and then see the video so that we can see what the museum looks like from the 3-year-old's height and perspective. That was actually really eye-opening in many ways. And again, like just we try to like encourage adults and ourselves to sit with the child and be at their eye level. And of course, we want to watch the child, but we also want to see what the child is seeing. I think that's really important. It is also important to be patient. The child might be thinking a lot. That's why they are quiet, maybe, or they might be trying a lot of different things, which can be frustrating to some adults because oftentimes the solution is pretty obvious to most adults. But instead of like jumping in and offer solutions or your own ideas, it is very important to be patient. And again, watch the child, observe the child, try to think about sort of like what the child might be trying to do and how they are trying to solve that problem. And sometimes us offering the right ideas or the right solution is not what the child needs. So it's important to remember that. And for adults, we often have, including myself, have all sorts of like wishes and wants and dreams of like what you want the child to be doing. We might have designed a program for a certain outcome. Yeah, of course, like we might expect that the child sort of like does the thing we provided and hopefully reach the outcome. But that's not always the case. And then sometimes I find that adults sort of like their own like wishes and wants sometimes interferes with the child's interests or progress, or even for us to understand what the child wants or needs. Because again, we are like, I want this child to be interested in this. So like we are trying to frame the child so that we can say, yes, this child was interested, even if the child was not. So it's very important to be aware that we have our own wishes and wants and how that might be playing a role in our way of observing the child. In order to identify the interests of the child, like sometimes when we just ask the adults like, okay, so what is your child interested in, like oftentimes the answers are like, well, they like playing with cars or they like to do puzzles, things like that, which is great. These are often called personal interests, like cars, trucks, like things like that are more based off of like a material, or even like playing with dolls, things like that. But we also want to think about situational interests, which might be that the child might be interested in playing with a lot of different people, or the child might be interested in being in a darker, quieter area to focus. Something like that, something that would affect how the child engages in the experience. It's also something that we need to take into consideration. And again, like sometimes the question that's so open, like what is your child interested in doing? Sometimes it's a little bit too limited, and we get answers again, like things like my child likes truck. So we identified some questions that might sort of like help the adults think a little bit more about the interests of the child. So the questions can be something like, like what gets the child excited? Like what kind of things? Whether, I mean, it might be still trucks, but like what about it that's so exciting for the child? What holds the child's attention? Like what about the truck? That's really keeping the child's attention. Or what does the child tend to choose most often? So if there's a truck, does it the same thing happen with like trains? Or maybe that the child likes the feel of the plastic, or I don't know, something like that. So really just kind of like start to think about beyond the material itself. And what gets the child to try something new. That's also important. Sometimes this kind of question gets into more of the situational interests rather than the personal interests. And also it's in all of the questions, actually, it's important to also think about the patterns of things that your child, the child might be drawn to. So it can be that actually, I always thought that my child really likes to play with bubbles, but it might have more to do with being wet, or it might have been more about like having the reflection of the light in a funny way, or like something like that. So really just thinking about the patterns can really extend our understanding of the child and the child's interests. But we don't always know the child's interests, because at the museum especially, we don't see the same child over and over. It's not like a school environment, so like all visitors are coming at different time and not everyone returns to the museum. Or we might be working with multiple children at once, so it might be a little bit hard to cater to one child's like individual's needs. So to try to sort of address that, we often try to plan for different possibilities. So like, yes, like this is the activity, but what if there is a child who might be doing it differently? So we try to sort of like think of like different ways that people might be engaging in our activities. And we also try to offer different choices and range of materials. In the museum, we have different exhibits, as you saw in the video, and we have different activities. So like they themselves can work as one of many choices, but even within one activity, within a program, we also try to offer different choices, different kinds of materials. All right, so I'm gonna pass the mic to Michelle.
Thanks, Saki. All right, so we are going to take a look at a series of a few different activities in the museum that we do. We thought these were a few different examples to really look at how we do STEAM the child's way. So again, our setting is a children's museum. So depending who is on with us today, some of what you see might be similar to the settings that you are in, and some of it might be very different. But we are happy to talk about those similarities and differences throughout this, and then at the questions and answers at the end. So here we're looking at a picture of a grown-up and a child, and they are putting together a puzzle of a skeleton. And we're going to look at two examples from Physiology Day, which is a day we have at the museum where we do all sorts of activities connected to the human body. And so in this particular case, we're looking at this child and grown-up who are doing kind of what we would expect, that we have this, what we love at the museum is a group collaboration. So they're working together, they're putting the pieces together of the skeleton where you would expect them to go in a skeleton. And so sometimes when you have an activity and a goal, the visitors go in that direction and they go with you, and it really aligns with your learning goals. And that's always exciting to see. For our next picture, Saki. So sometimes we also see things that are not maybe exactly what we were planning to see. So we're looking at a picture of a baby who is looking at that same skeleton puzzle, but not putting the bones together how you would expect the bones to be. So in this case, this is a young baby. So we weren't really planning for a baby to really understand the skeletal system and how things connect. In these situations, we sometimes see adults step in, and sometimes they can step in pretty quickly and want to show the baby where the bones go, how the puzzle works, how the pieces connect, which is not a bad thing. And it's really good to engage with the child and work with them, again, with group collaboration. But we really recommend, as Saki was saying, really stepping back and observing first. So really giving that baby some space to explore. And you might be surprised by what you see. So sometimes we might see that the baby is flipping the pieces around to the different sides. They might be focused on the fact that the front and back have different colors and designs. The material might be new to them. So they might want to feel the texture of it, the weight of it. They might want to put it in their mouths. We know babies explore a lot with all of their body. So this is a good way for us to really observe what is drawing this baby to this puzzle, what pieces is really exciting to this child. And we can think back to those questions that Saki posed about what's holding this child's attention. And you might even notice walking around the museum or in other settings that you'll start to notice a pattern of things that that child is drawn to. So when we think about how we can, we're going back one more, Saki. Can I get a sneak peek? Where how we can strengthen those interests. So if we look at this child and how they're interacting and realize that they're really excited about the texture or the colors and designs, we might see that there are other materials around that we can give the child to explore, or other activities around the museum or in different settings that we know really plays into those interests and those direct focus points for the child. And now Saki. So this is another picture from Physiology Day. We have a picture of a young child, older than the baby. So a boy who is holding up a picture of a skeleton, which is very clearly not put together the way you would expect. We have bones coming out of the head. We've got feet on the hips. We've got hands at the bottom of the legs. So sometimes when we put together this sort of activity, this activity does have a more specific end point that you would expect a child to use this opportunity to put the skeleton together in the way that a skeleton normally is. But kids are really silly and like to have fun. This is clearly not the way that a skeleton looks, but we can use this still as an opportunity. So sometimes as educators or grown-ups in this situation, you might feel like, oh, like this child is not doing this the way that I was expecting, and they might want to encourage them to do it a different way. But we like to use it as an opportunity so it doesn't feel like we're throwing away our learning goals, but instead really getting to have the opportunity to talk to this child about their skeleton, and kind of create some different learning opportunities here. So it's always really fun to ask the child why they put the bones in certain places. Sometimes they really surprise you with their thinking behind what they did. We could imagine what life would be like with hands on the ground and feet on your hips. It's also an opportunity to maybe talk about animals that have different skeletal structures than humans do. So thinking about how human skeletal structures actually are, and maybe even the way that this child has made his skeletal structure. And it's a way to talk about how things compare and how they differ. So sometimes with these types of activities, even though the child might not go in the direction that we had originally planned for the activity, there's still often places and many opportunities that we can go with the child and with their interest and their focus and their silliness and their fun with something, and go with them to explore on that route as well. So the next slide, we're looking at all three pictures together. So you can see, again, on Physiology Day, here are two examples of different types of activities for how to play and arrange a skeleton for a human. So it's easy to look at these and think that there's a certain way to do it. And sometimes visitors will go in that direction, and sometimes they don't. And that's still a really good opportunity to kind of gauge the interest and the focus of those children and to have fun. And ultimately, when we look at these three pictures, we see that all of the children in these pictures are very engaged. They're into what they're doing. And so that's really the focus at the end, that they are enjoying themselves, they're interacting with these activities and these materials in some way, whether it's the way we expected or not. And that's just what we love to see in our sort of environment. So the next type of example we're going to look at is a very common activity that's a big hit in the museum. We call it Airplay. And so we do Airplay in many different ways in the museum. We're looking at a picture of a young child sitting on a desk with a big covered box fan with lots of materials. And he's putting some, I believe it's a ball of aluminum foil over the box fan to see what happens. And his grown-up is right next to him, also looking excitedly on. You can see they're very engaged. We also have a short mini video of Airplay in action, where we have one of our staff and a grown-up with a young child playing, putting lots of materials over on top of the box fans to see what happens to them. You see there's materials all over the place. The material that we're using here, one of the big ones that really flies well, are strips of Mylar. So their Mylar is really fun. It's shiny. It makes a fun noise when you crinkle it, and it flies really well with the fans. So that's always a fan favorite for our friends. When we're setting up our activities for this, we really want to think about engaging the whole family or the whole group that comes in. So we do have a wide range of materials. We also have different setups. So as far as in this particular case, the box fans and everyone is sitting on the floor, since this is an activity we were doing with our 0 to 3-year-olds. Oftentimes we'll have short tables or tall tables as well. So that way there's different access points for family groups who might have comfort at different heights and different levels. The materials that we always offer a range of materials that fly really well, like those Mylar strips. Also things that don't fly very well, like heavy paper cups, some of the really big beach balls, things like that. So we really want to give the many opportunities, like Saki was saying, give lots of opportunities of different things to try and explore and play with. So we're going to go to the next picture. And what we're looking at, again, is a close-up of some of the materials we use. Here we have strips of Mylar, paper plate, beach balls, cups, feather boas. And next to that picture, we have a picture of cups. So this is from one of my own stories at the museum, where sometimes you're doing an activity, in this case, Airplay, where the goal of the activity is to try different materials over the fan and see what they do. And we were doing this activity, and there was a young child and their mother sitting next to the fan. So not in front of it, next to it. And the child was stacking cups. So I was sitting with the child and the mom, and the kid kept stacking and unstacking, stacking and unstacking. So we knew that the kid was really interested in the cups. So we took a cup and we were talking to the kid about, what do you think would happen if I put it over the fan? And we put the cup over the fan, and the kid couldn't care less. Airplay was not where this kid was, what they were excited about. But I was talking to the mom about the stacking and unstacking, and we were talking about the things that can come from stacking and unstacking cups, which actually stacking is one of the activities we do in the museum as well. We get some really amazing structures from visitors, but it's really good for their motor skills. It's good for organization. We can change the activity. We can add more cups so that they're making longer lines or stacking them taller. Also at home, the mom was saying like, well, when we get home, I have a cupboard full of plastic cups that I can now pull out and know that the child's going to be excited and into playing. You can do different sizes of cups. So even though it was not the intended activity, this child in particular was really excited about those cups. And so this is one of those examples of a good time to think about the child's interest versus the wants and wishes of the adults, in which case me and the mother of this child. So we could encourage the child to do Airplay, and we could have been disappointed that the child was not into Airplay, but we chose instead to be excited that we had a really good materials choice in that cup and having lots of cups, so the child had the opportunity to play with a lot of cups. And we instead looked at this from the perspective of what the child is doing with the cups, how they're interacting with them, and then how we can talk to them about cups and go with what they were excited about. So we're going to look at another example. And this one is mud. This is a fan favorite at the museum, mud play. So here we're looking at a picture of, this is our outdoor space in front of the museum. We have a large kiddie pool full of mud. We have containers, big containers, small containers, muffin tins full of mud. We have water available and a hose, I should point out, on the side. And we have a container of different tools like scoops and spoons and shovels and cups, things that the tools that children can use when they are interacting with mud. So mud play, when we do this, generally it's a very open-ended activity. And it's a really exciting option for a lot of children, is they don't always have the opportunity to play with mud, or they're not always encouraged to play with mud. And so this is a way that they get a chance to do that. I'll also note with this picture, we can see a lot of our materials again are on the ground. We do have chairs available. There's off on the side, we always have a table. Again, thinking about those setup needs and how some people might want to be a little bit further away from the mud, and some people might want to be right up in it. So we like to have that range of materials and opportunities. So we have the tools and the muffin tins for our kids who aren't really into the idea of mud or being messy, but they still want to explore. We also have, again, kid-sized pools full of mud, and those are for our friends who are all about being messy. So speaking of which, we're going to look at our next frame. Sometimes we have kids who get really excited about mud. We're looking at a picture of a young girl completely covered in mud. The muddy funnel on her head is my favorite part. And she got really excited about this opportunity just to be fully immersed in mud. So we're going to look at the next frame. So I do want to point out, so this is we're looking at two pictures of that same young girl in that tub of the kiddie pool of mud with her grown-ups. And her grown-ups are 100% with her in her mud exploration. They're also muddy, they're also on the ground, they're smiling. And I just want to point out an important note that this family in particular was prepared for mud play. They knew they were coming to the museum, they knew they were playing with mud, they had a change of clothes. I just want to note that we understand that it's not always possible for families to get this into mud play, because you might be taking the train home for an hour, and if you're completely covered in mud, that might lead to a really rough trip home. They might not have a change of clothes. So we do want to point out that while we encourage mud play to whatever level that we think that the kid is excited about, we also recognize that for certain things, in particular messy things, sometimes those grown-ups do need to make some calls about what will happen down the line if a child is covered in mud, even though, again, we do have water and hoses if we need. So we're going to look at the next picture, the next slide. And here we're looking at two pictures of more maybe what you would expect from mud play. We have staff members and a few children around the kiddie pools and the smaller buckets. The children are in smocks. We always offer smocks for mud play activities or anything that's really messy. They are alongside the pool. They're not in the pool of mud, and they're using a mix of their hands and the tools. So again, really taking advantage of the fact that they have this opportunity to work with a lot of different tools, including themselves in relation to the mud. So we're going to look at another slide. And this is a picture of a young girl who, again, is inside the kiddie pool of mud. And then we see her in the second picture. She's standing outside the pool of mud, but she has fistfuls of mud that she's holding over the pool so she could drop in the mud. So some kids really just want to touch and squeeze and explore the mud with their hands, with their feet. It might be something that it might be the first time they've had the opportunity to really get that into mud. Again, we don't always know the grown-ups' response, especially with messy activities. That's something we do need to be aware of, and again, offer smocks and things in place to encourage if they're comfortable with it. We do know for this case in particular, we have multiple pictures of this girl playing in the mud. So we like to think that the grown-ups, even if maybe they weren't super excited about it, they did let her go down and explore as she was excited to do so. So with all of this mud play, we really just want to have this activity be open-ended. And what we love about open-ended activities with lots of material options, lots of tools, is it's a really great way, again, to step back, observe, see what the child does, explore their interests. So maybe they don't want to touch the mud, in which case we can give them a small container and some tools. If the pool of mud is overwhelming or there's a lot of other children around they might not be really into, then we can give them their own space to the side. Some just want to jump right into it. Some might want to talk about when they're in it, it's a really good opportunity to talk about what it feels like, what they notice about the mud, how it interacts with different tools, what it sounds like when it plops into that pool if you're dropping fistfuls of it down. So again, these open-ended activities are a really great way to encourage grown-ups to step back and really see what the child is drawn to and how they're interacting with things. And then we can use that in the future. So, and Katsaki mentioned in the museum, we most of the time don't see the same kids over and over, though we do have families and members that come back regularly, but many of the people that we see are more one-off times. But it's still something that when those groups, those families go home after the museum, they then know they've learned something about their child and their interests and what draws their attention. And Saki's going to show us one more good example of this.
So last time we were doing the STEMI presentation, someone asked us about sort of like how we engage a child with severe special needs, severe disabilities. And while I was giving my answers to this, I was really thinking a lot of this particular child. So we are looking at pictures, 2 pictures of a child who is in a wheelchair. And then the mom, I know for the fact that it's a mom, is blowing bubble sort of like towards his face. And then the picture on the bottom, it's them sort of like looking at each other, being like clearly excited, like looking at their eyes, smiling, sort of like looks like they're saying like, wow, which is really nice. So we have this like a big bubbles exhibit. A lot of kids, typically developing kids in particular, go in like, try to blow bubbles. There are different sort of like different kind of bubble ones or rings or other tools to make bubbles with. But particularly this child, he is not very mobile, both sort of like in most of his parts of his body. He's nonverbal. He's really not super cognitively capable. But instead of them saying like, well, he can't blow bubbles, so we are not going to do it, they still went in and we blew bubbles to him. And then his face just like lit up and he just could not stop like looking at the bubbles. Again, like he was like, even if he can't say a word, again, it was very clear the way that he was vocalizing. He was like very excited about the experience, and it was really a nice moment when the mom and himself like really shared a moment like looking at each other. And while Michelle was talking about the example cups, I was also thinking that sometimes when the child does not engage in a way that you're expecting them to, the families also get, not only that like they might not try to do the activity, like they also get embarrassed. So I think it's also a role of the role of us as educators to really encourage and like point at what's good in the engagement. Again, we can be so easily disappointed, like, oh, he can't blow bubbles, like that's so sad or whatever. But like, no, it's not. Like you can still blow bubbles to him and like see how exciting it is, and how in your own way, like playing and making an experience great for yourself. And it does not matter like what other people are doing or how other people are engaged in. And that sort of like this moment also made me think of like, what can I observe about this child and what this child could be interested in if we were to do a different activity. And one of the examples could be ice. So at the museum, we do a lot of ice activity. So to the right, we are looking at picture of colorful ice. We put like some colors, objects. Also, we also freeze them in different shape for children to explore. And then because this child was really interested in the movement of the bubbles, maybe the color that you see through the bubbles, I thought that I'm gonna just play the video and just tell you what it is too. So in the video, we are like spinning the ice. Again, like it's kind of like a similar effect that we can expect from the bubbles. Like we can like spin it really fast. We can sort of move it around and see how the colors might like mix or change. And there are so many different ways to explore the ice. Like we can like maybe pour more colors, sprinkle salt, like all sorts of ways. But again, like it's not necessarily the point that the child themselves can use their like hands and fingers and touch and poke at the ice. What we can still engage with children with significant disabilities, but still work with their own interest, their own capability to make the experience meaningful for the child. So before we wrap up and maybe go to the Q&A time, I just want to mention just a couple more things really quickly. Is that while we're talking about this, it's still a challenge even for us to engage the adults and help them sort of understand what we're trying to do, sort of like a value of going with the child pace and all that. Even if a lot of adults do understand that play is valuable for learning, we often find that the society itself doesn't necessarily value play as play. And we talk a lot about how play is great for learning over XYZ. And of course, it's true and it's important. But I also want to point out that the play itself has its own value. For kids, it does not matter what they might be learning at the end. Like you're learning your fine motor skills, you're learning your social emotional skills. Yes, but for the child, that's not what matters. What matters to them is the moment when they are engaged in the activity. So we really want to put values on that. And of course, we talked based on our experience in the museum, which is an informal learning environment. And I'm sure there are different ways that it may or may not apply to your practice. So maybe we ask you to sort of reflect on that, how that might apply to your workplace or to your practice. And then now I think we are ready to go to the Q&A. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A or the chat. And we do have about 9 minutes left for some open-ended questions. This was fantastic, you guys. Thank you. I always learn from you all when you share your ideas and experiences. I will say, I will fully admit, while we wait for questions to trickle in, is I was cringing during the mud play. But okay, quick side story, and then we do have a question to answer. Yesterday, my daughter was in mud, and she decided to paint our neighbor's house with said mud. So I had a recent traumatic mud experience where we had to scrub our neighbor's house. So, okay, on to the questions. One says, is the Boston Children's Museum dedicated to STEAM? Just broadly, I think is the question, and I will turn it to you, but I think I know the answer.
Yes, the short answer is yes. For the last few years, the museum has made an effort to really focus and draw STEAM in. So we do have, as you saw in the video, a STEAM lab in the museum. It's right next to our art lab, and we use that whole area of our museum as the creative labs. We also have various exhibits in the museum that have more of a STEAM focus. And we do activities throughout, little pop-up activities throughout the museum that also use STEAM. So yes, we love STEAM at Boston Children's Museum and love how it can engage our visitor groups that come in.
I also want to point out that while we do focus on STEAM, STEAM is not the only thing we do too. So we also do a lot about, again, like sort of open-ended play, which again, like most of them actually do connect to STEAM. But we do a lot about like literacy type of thing, like story sharing, storytelling, theater, sort of more like a physical play type of stuff. As well as we are also like exploring different topics around like social emotional development, health, identity, all sorts of topics that we explore in the museum. But yes, like STEAM is definitely a big major topic that we offer in the museum.
Yeah, and like you said, Saki, I think there is a tremendous overlap between STEAM and all of the developmental domains you listed and more. You know, I think that whole idea of open-ended discovery lends itself to all kinds of rich development opportunities. Thanks for answering. And I wanted to also just share with attendees that the original STEMI Fest was going to be in Boston back before COVID, and we were going to have, as part of STEMI Fest, opportunities for families to visit the Boston Children's Museum. And we do hope that in the future, if everything works out with this pandemic, that we will get to partner in a more concrete way and have opportunities for attendees of STEMI Fest to come to Boston and visit the museum with their families, in addition to funding opportunities for families to come to STEMI Fest. So just a little tangent there that I think is somewhat related to what you all are sharing. How about any other questions? Not seeing anything trickle in. Well, I will share, we still have a couple of minutes left, but in the chat, I'm going to be posting a link for an evaluation. So you guys can give us feedback, attendees can give us feedback through that Qualtrics link. I'm posting it right now. And so you'll have the opportunity to also ask questions in that evaluation feedback. And I know we had a couple of attendees who are looking forward to the recording because they weren't able to stay. So they might have some questions that come through on the evaluation. But I think a final activity we could do is, if you all don't mind sort of taking the second bullet on the slide and how this information applies to your own setting and your own practice, and typing some ideas in the chat, that might be kind of a cool way to end. I feel like there's always a little bit of a delay when And I'm like, no one's typing anything in chat, but.
Yeah, I did look at, see in the chat, there were a lot of interesting comments about the activities we were talking about and choices of materials, really good way to engage children and adapt activities. The engineering math possibilities with stacking cups, comparing, contrasting. Yeah, there's so many different ways you can, places you can go with kids based on what they're excited about and drawn to in a specific activity.
Yeah, definitely. So we're getting a little activity in the chat room, and I see Josie is saying this presentation is going to help her in the future guide providers to even more so allow open-ended learning opportunities instead of, setting up activities with expectations and so much structure. And Zainab said, I funded a project through Donor Choose called Full STEM Ahead, and our students love the mobile STEM station, and to see their curiosity is awesome. Yes, I fully agree with that.
Yeah, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
We do definitely encourage open-ended activities, and you can just go in so many different places. There's definitely great opportunities and times to have more structured activities.
Mm-hmm.
And even when we do structured activities, we find that we always add a little piece at the end after we've explained, and we add, for example, like, or you can do what you'd like.
Yeah.
So we have like a lantern making activity that we've done where you're following steps to make a paper lantern, and then they add a little LED light into it. But for some kids, they just really love cutting paper.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our young friends working on scissor skills, and so in that case, it's like maybe you don't end up with a lantern.
Right. A pom-pom with a light on it or something.
Yeah. So even if you are doing something that is more structured, there's still that possibility of relaxing a little and really letting the child still guide that activity and see where they go with it.
Yeah, that makes me think back to the earlier in the presentation, the skeleton that somewhat older child put together. But what I was noticing about that skeleton is just the perfect symmetry in his skeleton. It was like, whoa, those arms are not where they're supposed to be, but they're perfectly symmetrical.
Mm-hmm.
That was cool. I liked that. And there's a couple more, yes, FPG Web 1000, aka Ching, put, I also see the materials you used are mostly household materials available cheap and free, like mud, and not anything that families need to go out and purchase. So that opens up the opportunities for so many families.
Mm-hmm.
And Jody put, reflecting on how you taped the camera to the child-sized shopping cart to get a view of the museum from the children. This takes the idea of gaining the children's perspective to a literal level. Yes, a new level. Yeah, that is really cool. I will say, share with the attendees as well, on that evaluation link is at the end, the opportunity for your professional development certificate. I should have highlighted that when I first said that, but yeah, this is great. Yeah, good ideas. And yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, based on materials, that's something that we really focus on in the museum. Is there are times and opportunities where we want our visitors to engage with things they might not have the opportunity to do outside of the museum, but a lot of our activities are with really common materials, and we often have people right now. And one of the activities in the museum is Lego Zipline. So we just put out different types of, we have fishing line and yarn, and they're trying to make things with Legos that go from the top to the bottom without stopping. And we all this time, when people are engaged in those sorts of activities, they always say like, oh, we can set this up at home.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something you want to encourage, that they take that fun in those activities back with them as well.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I love it. A Lego Zipline.
Lego Zipline is a good one.
Yes, you're getting lots of feedback on that. All right, well, I do see we are at our time point. You guys, thanks so much for making time to do this. So useful and resourceful as always. And we'll share the evaluation results with you all, and you can enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks.